Welcome back to the Conscious Biotech Exec. Today, to talk about clinical project management, I have Kerrin Young. Kerrin, welcome, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Claudia. I'm glad to be here.
So, let's start with a little background on you. You work for Centria, a company focused on developing therapeutics to address unmet clinical needs. How long have you been with Centria, and what is your current role there?
So I've been with Zentria since October of last year. So I've just gotten above my 90-day mark there. And I'm currently the director of clinical operations, where we're kind of building out the operational capacity. It's a small biotech in the Chicago area. There's a sister company that's a generic, and we partner with them and other companies to bring in different compounds and molecules for development. They're therapeutic area agnostic in terms of focusing first on unmet clinical need. The good news when I first walked in was that there were a lot of SOPs that were developed from a standpoint of really addressing what needs to get done. So now, as the new director of clinical operations, I'm working on building out the how things will get done, utilizing the talents of team members that are there to get the work done.
Very cool. So you're contributing to developing the structure and the actual program. I could see how that would be its own challenge. You mentioned that you've been in the role for a couple months, so that means you were looking for a role during this super competitive market. Can you share some of your experience? Maybe you have some tips for listeners who are looking for a new role right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So 2023 was tough in the sense that I had moved on from another company, given that the company where I worked wound up dissolving. So we were all tasked with moving on from the CEO on down to the receptionist at the company. Given that I was faced with moving on earlier this year, I didn't necessarily have quite a sense of how tough it was going to be. I think that it just continued to get progressively more challenging given what we've learned. There are so many companies that have so much challenges, especially the biotech sector, with funding and securing new funding. There was a lot less to choose from. But I would say, given that this is a bit of a unique situation, start to look into going several levels deeper. And what I mean by that is you want to reach out to those individuals that you may know that may either be in a hiring manager capacity, or they may be adjacent to those hiring managers, to go a level deeper in terms of introducing yourself, asking to be introduced to additional people that those people may have in their network. And then after you've kind of like gone that level deep, look into going even deeper so that you have exposure to as many opportunities as you can, since there are less to choose from at this point in time.
Yeah, what you described is, I think, a really good way of trying to build a larger network using what you already have, which is, I think, really important right now because the biotech job market sure is tough. They are actually projecting it will get worse before it picks back up later this year.
Mm-hmm.
And with all the layoffs, like you mentioned, and knowing that hiring managers can default to hiring the overqualified candidate because there's going to be a lot more of them right now applying to similar roles, I could definitely see how even people like you and I, who have been in the industry for some time, would still have a hard time finding a new role right now. I do agree with you. I think the best thing candidates can do right now is, like you said, leverage their network and dig deeper so that they can build a larger network. I also think learning from each interview goes a long way, and you probably know this better than me going through this process. Candidates can use feedback from each interview to tailor their resume and to adjust their career journey story to showcase the value that they have added to projects, to teams, and to companies, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. Like you said, getting feedback from the job interviews, speaking with people that are in your network, and kind of like tailoring your resume as needed. Call out some of those buzzwords. So, for example, for people that have been in the industry for a while, there may be certain things that they've done in their job role, but you don't necessarily put every single thing. You don't throw the entire kitchen sink at your resume. One example that I have is that when I was speaking with some additional people that I worked with before, they were asking me to call out the biomarker experience that I had. It just was one of the experience that I didn't choose to put on my resume. So she said the biomarker experience was one that would really pique people's interest. So that was something that I utilized to kind of tailor my CV going forward as well. From a job search standpoint, a lot of it is reviewed through hiring managers, but there's also a technical aspect of there may be some computer software. Those buzzwords are identified in your CV immediately. And for example, some of the rare disease and gene therapy experience I have, I know that different hiring managers, recruiters may do searches on things like that. So really think about some of the experience that you have that can set yourself apart that you may not have put on your resume or CV. Think about tailoring it that way so that you can be brought in front of some of those hiring managers, or even called to the attention of recruiters so that they can put you in front of the right people at the right time.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I've heard of all these applicant tracking systems. Also, the recruiter point that you made, I think of making sure that after you update your resume, you also update your link, because a lot of recruiters use LinkedIn to look
That's
for
true too.
applicants. So just constantly making sure you're updating everything is important. So let's go back in time. What was your first role in biotech?
So I went to the University of Illinois Champaign, studied chemistry and psychology. When I first finished, I didn't know what I wanted to do next. I just knew that I wanted to, kind of stay in the vein of science-based and research. Clinical research lead jumped out at me. The question is, okay, so how do I get into the industry? I utilized a recruiter. I think back then I uploaded my resume to monster.com, dating myself. That was a long time ago. But like it helped me to get that first job doing a data QC, an offshoot of the regulatory department. And then I knew that I wanted to target more to get into clinical, but then I kind of got into that situation where you needed to have the experience, or you needed to know someone to get in. Utilizing the same recruiter, the opportunity presented itself. I relocated to Minnesota and became a CRA assistant, and then kind of worked my way into being a CRA and getting the experience that way. So, so as far as, your career development and your career goals, your manager can be your first line of defense. Other people that are like-minded at your company can help to mentor you and be a champion for you with the experience that you have, and the different people that you meet along the way. Recruiters could help carve out that career path for you as well.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, leveraging the recruiters. Based on what you just described, it sounds like you went into data QC/management with the desire. You already knew about this clinical research career path that you wanted to go down. Did you know, or was there a difference between in-house CRA and a regular field CRA? Did you know you wanted to be one or the other?
So when I did see the CRA job description, the traveling CRA job description, that one was the one that really jumped out at me the most.
Okay. I think we have a similar experience. So I actually started as a volunteer clinical research coordinator. It was the first time I realized that clinical research was a viable career path for me. And my first CRA role after that was for a small biotech. And at that time, I was doing, I would say, both roles, the in-house and the field role, because I was traveling and I was also co-monitoring. But kind of thinking back to that role and then me becoming a hiring manager and thinking about what's really required as far as experience for people who are trying to move into those roles, the field CRA role, I could see why you would want some more experience, some more exposure to clinical research, who the sponsor is, who the investigation site is, what they do, like all that stuff, and the regulatory piece, all that information, I think is important to understand, and some sort of therapeutic background as well, right? For that field CRA, I think is important. But for the in-house role, me as a personal manager, I I don't think experience is required. It's very administrative. It's very easy to train people to the in-house role and then let them work up and decide too, what do you want to do? Do you want to? I see the paths a little bit different. I see the in-house CRA path could lead you to a clinical project manager role in the future, if that's, something that you're interested, versus a field CRA role could lead you to more of a field CRA manager roles. And I could see how you can move from in-house CRA to field if you want to travel, if that's your
Hmm.
thing. If you
Hmm.
don't want to travel, you have commitments at home, you could do the in-house path and there's still career progression somewhere.
And like you said, if travel is one thing that they're open to doing, as far as family commitments and things like that, with some additional training, it's very doable, especially if you have that progression from being the in-house to the field CRA.
Well, it sounds like we're pretty aligned there. I mean, there's
Yeah,
there's like what we experience and then what we're trying to learn, right, as
that's
people
right.
managers moving forward, how we want to do things. I think it's important to reassess that. And for me, it's not something I truly reassessed until I'd say the last 3 years, to be honest. Before that, I would see these job descriptions and I'd say, oh yeah, that makes sense. This is how we hire. This is what we do. And then as I moved from one area to another, specifically medtech to pharma, I started to reassess what skills are really needed and why. And if
That's
those
right.
skills aren't there, what other skills can you leverage, right,
That's
to
right.
train somebody to
That's right.
still be able to be successful in the role?
Absolutely. Yeah. I was going to say years ago that I don't think that there existed a CRA. Like I said, outside of the formal company, there weren't really CRA training courses, but now independent of different companies, I see standalone CRA and even CRC training courses where you could go and obtain
Hmm.
experience from that perspective, even if you haven't had the initial exposure to really help to get your foot in the door. So I'm really happy to see that as the years have gone by, to really give those types of base level, entry level opportunities, at least from a training perspective.
Yeah, yeah. I haven't spoken to anyone who's gone through them yet, but it's really good to see that they are out there. You moved your way, you worked your way up to your current director role where you are overseeing clinical project managers. What are some other skills that you had to learn when you started managing clinical project managers?
From a career progression standpoint, to manage clinical project managers, years before I once did the same job. From that standpoint, like I kind of like look for those same qualities, as far as being able to have that base understanding of how to manage vendors well, whether they be the CRO, or the ancillary vendors, and understanding of meeting timelines, and helping to set timelines, so that everyone's on the same page with what needs to be done. Some of the successful people in those roles are those that are able to apply soft skills in order to effectively manage those teams, even though those team members don't necessarily report to you, and how you can influence their motivation to get their reach the goals that feed into the larger timeline. Those are some key experiences that you would look for in a CPM. I've also seen CPMs that are very successful that aren't that don't have a CRA background. They may have a key background in
Hmm.
being a previous research manager or coordinator. I've also seen people that have a med tech background, that are very successful in being a clinical project manager, and have a very good knowledge base.
I agree with that. I think at the end of the day, if you have somebody who had a deliverable that they've contributed to for a clinical project, you don't necessarily have to have been at CRA. It could have been one of those other cross functions.
Mhm.
The key is knowing how to work with cross functions, how to
That's
partner
right.
with them,
That's
and
right.
how to. It's a lot of the soft skills, right? Like when I think about this, when I became a cross-functional leader and a people manager, I had to learn to lead and influence without authority. I could see how if it doesn't matter if you're in any of those other cross functions, if you're able to apply that and you want to be a clinical project manager, it's going to be easy for you to take that step, especially because you will already understand the deliverables, but then you will also get to learn in the process how to build a timeline, how to develop a budget. Like those things are all very technical and they're very
Right.
easy to learn. I think they're easier to learn than learning to lead and influence without authority,
Very true.
personally. You know, for
Very true.
me, this came naturally for personalities that were similar to mine. It took more effort and a lot more trial and error to learn to lead and influence different personalities. So I
Absolutely.
believe this
Right.
is one that's important for both cross-functional leadership
Mhm.
and direct people management. So
Mhm.
it's never too early for people to start practicing and to keep working on it as we advance into leadership roles.
Yeah, yeah. No, yeah, you've hit the nail on the head in terms of not only, leading and influencing with authority, but also understanding how to navigate those skills and even those soft skills to help to influence others that may have different personalities. So, absolutely, you're going to run into that
Mhm.
regardless of which company you work, whether it's large, medium, or small. And then I also don't want to be remiss in without mentioning individuals that may have backgrounds is in nursing, have a great
Mm.
advantage. But then I've also seen that, with the nursing background and then, taking that next step, whether it's nursing to research coordinator, research manager, or nursing and then applying, some of those base level project management skills. And then, once you do that, they have, such an advantage in this industry to be successful as well.
I
That's
think
right.
that's a really good point, Corinne. Having a
Yeah,
healthcare background is really advantageous if you want to move into biotech, into any of these roles.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
Awesome. So we kind of talked a little bit about this, but let's talk about what clinical project managers do and how the scope of the role varies within our industry. What are some activities that your clinical project managers do or that you've seen them do? And again, you've probably seen this over several different companies. Give us a general idea of what they did. And then I'm happy to talk about how the scope varies as
Yeah,
well.
definitely. So, I touched on it a little bit earlier, but to dive a little bit deeper, a keen understanding of timelines and building timelines and how timelines have dependencies, and a lot of times there are vendors that may or may not have a level of understanding of how to meet deliverables, ensuring that their product is a quality product as well, having those
Mhm.
technical skills as well, whether they be, leverage spreadsheet, how to run reports within your EDC or your IRT system. Having those basic understandings is going to lend itself very well to doing your job well as a clinical project manager, getting from basic to intermediate level. Microsoft Excel can help you track, predict patient enrollment, and some of the potential pitfalls that you may experience during the life of your research project. So, honing those technical skills can really serve you well.
Yeah. Yeah, those are all similar, activities that I had to do as a clinical project manager and that my clinical PMs have to do too, from vendor management, like you mentioned, to, developing program budgets, developing timelines, to develop a good timeline, knowing who your key players are, right? Who are your key stakeholders and knowing how to get their buy-in on what the timeline should look like. They are the subject matter experts at the end of the day. And so our role is really as a project manager was to really understand what their deliverables was to really understand what their deliverables look like for the cross functions, since they have to do the work, how long it's going to take. And if it's going to take longer than previous projects, that we have the rationale and we're able to communicate that. But as you know, the scope of the role does vary within biotech, depending on the size of the company and the org structure. For example, when I was at Medtronic Neurovascular, the CRAs reported into the clinical PMs as well. So comparing this to the scope of the roles in big pharma and CROs, the Medtronic PM was essentially performing the duties of both a clinical PM and a clinical study manager in big pharma, because
Okay.
they were managing the clinical team and they were also working with all cross functions and vendors to implement the clinical projects all the way from planning through closure. And so the key takeaway that I want people to have here is that focus less on the title and more on the job duties,
Right.
and ensuring that the salary matches those duties.
Right.
And people should also just be asking themselves, like, what can they learn by performing those duties? Does the role have more or less of the things that they really enjoy? Will the role expose them to more of what they will enjoy doing and help them grow in areas that they want to grow, or not? Right? At the end of the day, I think that's the question we all have to ask ourselves before we take the next step in our careers. Just because it's there doesn't mean you have to take it. Just because it's the next one, or it looks like it's the next one and it's closest to what you've been doing, doesn't mean it's right for you. We're always growing. So that's something that we have to reassess.
Yeah. Yeah. Ask those key questions of yourself before you get into the role. You got to,
Mhm.
enjoy what you're doing to continue to be successful. So, absolutely agree.
We've already been talking about this. My next question was going to be on skills,
Hmm.
but we've already been kind of talking about not just what clinical project managers do, but also the skill set that is associated with that. Are there any other skills or qualities that you look for in your PM candidates?
I would say some motivated self starters, being a go getter, being on top of um, you know uh, the team dynamics, and ensuring that not only you reach your goals but the team reaches their goals. From that motivated self starter perspective, if you're able to motivate yourself, it's infectious. You're going to motivate others. That is one of those intangibles that can help you and your team go a very long way.
I'm going to back you up on that, because I do agree. I think that being motivated and being a self starter is a really good quality to have as a clinical project manager. I'm going to add to that. I'm going to say adaptability and accountability. All of those. And then we already talked about the ability to influence without authority.
That's right.
Right? I think
That's right.
all of those are important. And the reason why they're important for listeners to understand is because everything in clinical research is fast paced and things are often changing unexpectedly,
Mhm.
because we're constantly working to meet demands, right, of constant innovation. There's ever changing regulations. So things are always changing there. And then, regardless of what company you work with, we're always trying to learn and make things more efficient. So it's a lot of work and it requires a very unique skill set. If you're going to interview with me, I want to know about a time you helped a team member who was falling short on deliverables.
That's right.
What was your approach? And tell me the result.
That's right.
Mistake that you made and your approach to making things right again. And an example of how you handled changing priorities and what the result was. So if you're able to provide those concrete examples, it makes it easier for me to understand if you're the right person for the role. And it sounds like for you, Corinne, also a candidate being able to provide an example of a time that they showed that they were motivated and that they motivated people around them, and that they took initiative essentially, to do something, that would be key for you, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I would say that your personality type as well, being that motivated self starter, even if you think you're kind of an introverted person, can still help you, just in terms of ensuring that you and reach the goals, and then influence your team to help them reach their goals. So it's a nice to have to kind of be an extrovert, but not everyone 100% of the time needs to be a type A personality to be a successful clinical project manager.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think everybody does have certain qualities that fall more on the introverted versus extroverted. I think there's a balance there. What you're also talking about, I think, is hiring for culture. You want the diverse backgrounds, but there are certain skills that you do want them to have in common, because they are going to also be working with very different personalities across the company and with vendors outside, other key stakeholders that may be outside of the company. It's also important for the person who is being interviewed to remember that if you get turned down because of that, it's good for you too, because you also don't want to be in a position where you don't feel that what you bring to the table is fully valued.
The cultural fit is a big plays a big part in it. But at the same time, when you meet the different people within your potential new team, you should see whether you think you would be a good cultural fit too, and keep that in the back of your mind so that there's that alignment.
Yeah, that's really important. I agree. Kind of goes back to the questions, right? Things that are more important than just the title of the role, right? Like, oh, do I understand what I need and how I'm going to excel? And is a manager equipped to do that? Do they agree? Do they have the time to invest in that? Because if you have that alignment up front, then, once you start, then you can hold each other accountable. You also have to be really honest about what you need to excel in the role that you're going to step into, so
Agree
that the
100%.
manager also has an opportunity to then ask themselves, okay, can I really support this person? Am I equipped to? Do I have the time, or do I just need somebody who already has this quality? And that's
Right.
an important question for the manager too.
That's right.
Yeah.
Agree.
Awesome. So one thing that we haven't talked about is therapeutic and product alignment. Do you hire for therapeutic or product alignment, or is that more of a nice to have for you?
It's more of a nice to have. I would say that for the most part, people's experience is easily translatable, with the exception of some of the more challenging therapeutic areas. But at the same time, some of the more challenging ones can also be very hard to place for. So it's a nice to have. If you can find something that aligns perfectly, that's great. But it's more of a nice to have versus a must have, because those type of skills and experience are definitely translatable. Getting back to what we were discussing before about being a motivated self-starter, being able to, successfully manage a timeline and a budget, have that influence over your team. All of those are outside of the therapeutic area, and the therapeutic area experience is the part that you can sit down and learn through different training courses. It's more of a nice to have versus a must have.
I would say, honestly, about 90% of the skills that we learned as clinical project managers can transfer easily to any therapeutic area.
Right.
I moved from med tech to pharma, and my approach was immediately to figure out, okay, what's new? And I have to be teachable. I have to figure
Right.
out who are my points of contacts, who can bring me up to speed and help me fill these gaps. And I have to do it fairly quickly so that I can then also interface with key opinion leaders and talk about the program on a technical level. So I used to also hire for therapeutic and product alignment. I stopped doing it after I moved from medtech to pharma. And it's just because that transition really made me realize how transferable the ClinOps skill set is across therapies and product. I've been able to, adapt my hiring process for that as well. So now I spend more time on, finding out how candidates approach new challenges. And you mentioned this too. If they understand their areas for growth, and if they are willing to put energy into closing that gap to be successful in the role. So I try to ask those questions up front. Well, Corinne, I do want to be respectful of your time here. Do you have any other insights for listeners who are interested in becoming a clinical PM or in following in your footsteps in particular?
The job market and how challenging it is, especially in our biotech sector, is going to make some of the toughest candidates want to give up. So I want to make sure that we kind of impart on them that, that they shouldn't give up. It's going to, I would say that, be ready for it to take longer than what you're used to, but it's not going to not happen, especially for people that are motivated self-starters, people that, feel that this career aligns with their career goals, and is going to, bring them some level of fulfillment in their career. So keep at it.
Yeah, great advice, Corinne. for our listeners to be persistent and to,
Yes,
use every rejection as fuel to try to adapt as they move forward and continue to try to find that role that they think is right for them.
absolutely.
So, Corinne, thank you again for your time and for sharing your journey and your insights with us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me, Claudia.